Good morning. We're going to talk about lesson 5 today, and that is Bleeding Kansas, which in the new section of notes would be page 7. Now, a couple of things that you need to know about the Bleeding Kansas incident was this was a response really to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which Stephen Douglas had tried to put forward. Stephen Douglas, remember, wanted to try and bring both North and South together, and he felt like he was doing it through giving the ability of all the territories to decide their own fate when it came to slavery. And so he wanted to use the issue of popular sovereignty in order to allow both Kansas, Nebraska, and any other future territories which were going to enter the Union to use popular sovereignty in order to decide for themselves whether they wanted slavery or not. Now, once the Kansas-Nebraska Act is passed, then Kansas and Nebraska can choose slavery for themselves based on popular sovereignty. In order to do that, you need to have a vote. What they were voting on was they were voting on a version of what would become their state constitution. And in one version of the state constitution, you would have slavery being legal. And in another version of the state constitution, you would have slavery being illegal. And so people were choosing between these two versions of the state constitution. And so when anti-slavery people hear about this, they are outraged because they felt like the Compromise of 1850 and the Compromise of 1820 both had a good set of rules for how slave states and free states were to enter the Union, and by getting rid of those agreements, this would upset the balance. For the Southerners, they felt like this was going to be their opportunity to expand slavery into places where they felt like slavery wasn't going to be in the past. What ends up happening, though, is the anti-slavery people end up pushing a lot of people into the territory, and you have a lot of slavery people pushing their way into the territory, all in preparation for this vote. And so by the time the vote actually occurs, the South feels like they were betrayed. Like if things were just left to naturally happen, then Kansas would have chosen to become a slave state. And by all these abolitionists moving there, they felt like this was a betrayal not only by the Northerners who were going to allow them to use popular sovereignty, but also by Stephen Douglas, because he was the one who put forward this idea. And so if it was his idea, he should have had a little bit more control over this. The strange part of this is that when we get into the violence that happens in Kansas over the popular sovereignty vote, actually there were only 2 slaves in the entire territory. And so it's not as if they were bringing in their slaves with them. They were just going there in order to vote in the first, only in anticipation of there being eventual slaves there would they then later bring slaves with them after the vote occurred. One of the more famous incidents in the violence between the northern abolitionists and the southern pro-slavery folks was in Lawrence, Kansas. In 1856, pro-slavery raiders go into Lawrence, Kansas, which was a settlement founded by abolitionists in anticipation of the vote. And when they go into Lawrence, Kansas, it's all abolitionists, and so they start shooting up the town, start killing people, and then they actually burn the entire town down. And so the town of Lawrence, Kansas really becomes a focus for both sides of this issue about how this was a group of abolitionists who were moving into the territory to try and cheat the vote, and that this was a group of innocent abolitionists who were just there to hopefully prevent slavery, and they were really minding their own business and they weren't doing anything illegal. So you have those two sides. Another incidents of violence in this case then comes after the Bleeding Kansas incident, when Charles Sumner of Massachusetts, who is a senator, gets onto the floor of the Senate to talk about the evil crimes that have been committed by slavery folks in Kansas against abolitionists. And he starts railing against the pro-slavery folks and how violent they are and how slavery causes violence and things like that. And he especially starts picking on a senator from South Carolina. And so he keeps going on and on about how bad the people of South Carolina are, and he keeps going on and on about how in particular this one senator from South Carolina was, and railing against him. And it's just so happened that his nephew, Preston Brooks of South Carolina, was in the House of Representatives representing South Carolina in the other house. He hears about this speech, he comes across the Congress building into the Senate and begins beating Charles Sumner with his stick, with his walking cane. And so this incident becomes known as the caning of Charles Sumner. Of course, the North now puts Charles Sumner up as a victim of Southern violence and kind of uses this as proof as to, well, look, it's exactly what we said. He is the Southerners are very violent. And the Southerners see Preston Brooks as standing up for their interests, standing up for their Southern honor, and standing up for the cause of slavery. And so they turn Charles Sumner into a hero. Now, what happens actually is, because of the Kansas issue, because of the caning of Charles Sumner, we have the Democratic Party being split along sectional lines. Northern Democrats can't get along with Southern Democrats anymore. Northern Democrats, a lot of them are trying to get elected to be president, and so they're trying to bring everybody together. But the Southern Democrats at this point are unwilling to compromise. They say, well, we compromised in 1820, we compromised in 1850, we compromised on the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and you've cheated us every time. The Northerners are saying, well, we compromised in 1820 and we compromised in 1850, and you went against all of those compromises to get new deals made. And so we're unwilling to work with you anymore. And so the Democratic Party is fatally split after these two incidents, which will play a large effect in the election of 1860. So there we go, and we'll see you in the next one.